Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
We are live in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, I came down for another fine march.
Glad you did.
Yeah,
That's right. And we have a special voice here with us today. And this is our friend, Mr. Victor Hidalgo. How's it going, Vic?
It's going fine. Hello, everyone.
So Vic is the one of the masterminds behind the showcase we come down and play every year in March, the Music Madness ATX Festival. And it's several days of music. Vic, you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, MMATX started back in 2007, when met you guys in 06, and we've managed to put on a show for the last now 10 years. We just celebrated 10-year anniversary. So
Congratulations.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
A very fine show it was.
Over the span of 10 years, we've met a lot of great bands, and so they come back and play, and we all have a fabulous time.
Yeah,
We sure do.
it was a good time. And let's not forget, we're also speaking on the day of Wendy's birthday.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
happy birthday.
Hey,
Happy
thank
birthday,
you.
Wendy.
Thank you.
21 feels good, doesn't it?
It feels amazing.
So,
But yeah, so we played the showcase on Saturday night after working our way down here through Cincinnati, Nashville, New Orleans, which were all really fun stops where we checked out some haunted places and shared some of that history and played some music. And the finale of the tour was Saturday night, and we had a live stream, which was at musicmadnessatx.com.
Yes, it was.
And that feed is still available for people to check out, right?
It is. It's archived at musicmadnessatx.com. Click on the watch live, and then on day 4 poster, and it's the last hour of the event.
and so if you guys, we played music from our new release, which is all stuff that we wrote for the podcast in the past few months. So if you've been enjoying the songs that are at the end of the podcast, you're going to want to check that out, and you can watch Wendy and I and our guitar player Ben performing those songs live for you from the musicmadnessatx.com website. And we also have a new release coming from those songs.
That's right.
In just a couple of weeks.
That's right. And so, Vic, thanks for having us back all these years.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. How did you feel about the 10-year show?
Well,
Showcase?
it was a fun event. Of course, you guys know y'all did put together a lot of events yourselves, and it's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
We're a 2-man operation, and we're glad that all our sponsors, Topps Office Furniture and Nature's Treasures and Topo Chico and Hard Rock Energy Drink, they all came on board, and we're a big part of it. So I'm
always appreciate that.
glad to have that type of support, for our event, and I can pretty much say it was a success.
Excellent.
Yeah, we think so too. We got to watch a lot of good music. We got to perform. And also, we're going to be taking some of those Hard Rock energy drinks with us home
Yes.
for the 20-hour drive back to Madison today.
We'll be chugging those babies.
Absolutely. So another fun thing real quick before we get to the meat of the podcast here is that, so we were talking about some of the haunted stories and the weird stuff that we collected on the way down. And so what Vic's like, he asked about something, what was one of the most interesting stories. And then I proceeded to talk about Tiny Town, which is something we found in Cincinnati.
That's right. Yep.
And he's like, San Antonio, we had the same thing. And what was it called?
Midget Mansion.
And this was it's a small house. Looked like a little mansion for little people, right? It was just
Yes.
It was to scale. Like everything was to scale so that it was an appropriate sized house for smaller people.
And my favorite part of the story is that it was originally built by a little actor who had made his name in Hollywood, or made his fortune in Hollywood, probably in The Wizard of Oz. I would guess that would have something to do with it. And then he came back, but he built the house small, but would always hire regular sized servants to make him suffer.
Right.
And treated them horribly.
Right, and so then one day he goes, one of the servants can't take it and kills the family, and that's the story behind it. And then people say that you can hear, gunshots and screaming and stuff. And you used to visit there?
As a kid, the property was abandoned. I believe a fire pretty much closed down that property. So the legend lived in San Antonio. So we we would go over there at night and, try to scare each other by
Those things are
see who could walk the furthest into the house, but nothing ever happened, of course.
No blood on the walls or anything like that.
No, it was just a bunch of raccoons running around.
It's funny how those places are like magnets for kids. Kids always want to go and check out the scary places like that.
Well, I know I did. We had the place in Wisconsin called Haunchyville, which I think I've talked about on the podcast before, where it was the same kind of thing. And the fascination with little people, dwarves and stuff. Maybe because when you're a kid, you feel closer to them or something like that.
I don't know.
They're always enchanted characters, which I know is ableist or whatever, but that's just how they're done. So anyway, it was fun to talk about a little, share some weird stories, have a good time. This episode, I'm interviewing astrologer Jeff Harman, who's got some interesting takes by reading the stars of all the different presidential candidates' birth dates and things like that. So this is our election special focusing on astrology.
Excellent.
And this is a first for See You on the Other Side podcast, and we have a astrologer on the show, and I'm excited about this particular episode because I want to get into what the stars might have to say about the election coming up. And so we have with us astrological and spiritual consultant Jeff Harman coming from Calabasas, California. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing real good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. I think it's going to be fun. I don't know, outside of the basics about astrology, I don't know anything about it besides what you see on like the Chinese placemats at the restaurants, and then what you see in the newspaper. And also, Jeff and I were talking before the show, and he's a Wisconsin guy too. So where did you grow up, Jeff?
Well, I actually grew up in northern Wisconsin, a little place called Sainer. It's right in between Eagle River and Minocqua.
Okay.
So Sainer, Wisconsin, and was on Lost Lake. So that's how I got into astrology. Was back in the 70s. Actually, it's just over 40 years now. It was 1975. My mother, I was driving at the time, and my mother was absolutely calling the girlfriends to the T. And I said, wait a minute, this is not mother's intuition. I said, how are you doing this? And she started showing me. She would get, the girl's card. Not that I had that many girlfriends, but,
Enough.
When I would go out with a girl, she would get her birthday and run her stuff. And she was amazingly accurate. And I said, well, I want to learn this. I was pretty skeptical at the time. I really didn't believe astrology worked. And every time I still think that, it always proves me wrong.
So your mom ran the actual, she'd have charts and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, back then it was BC, before computers, so
Right.
She would do it by hand, and when I learned it, it was all by hand. And it was really fascinating. It was very intriguing, and you and I were talking before the show. I also had a recording studio where I was doing filming, and we were doing commercials. Of course, the Midwest is rich with commercials and industrial films, and I did a lot back then. And all during that time, I was still doing astrology, and I always found it interesting because the more I did it, by the time I get into the 80s, I was getting fairly proficient at it. And I would look at, why is this guy a graduate of Berklee College of Music and the next guy's, down in the break room smoking pot, it would be just interesting to look at people's energies and profiles. But I think the biggest thing was the ancient astrology. Modern, and you had mentioned earlier, the placemats and the restaurants and the sun sign stuff.
Right.
That's what I call love, light, and cluelessness. It's fun, but it's not really accurate. The ancient stuff, particularly like Nadi astrology, it's also known as Vedic astrology.
Okay, what'd you call it? Because at first you made it sounded to me like naughty astrology, and I'm like, well, I want to know a little
Nadi,
bit more about
N-A-D-I. N-A-D-I, Nadi.
Okay.
It's the Nadi palm leaves and also Jyotish astrology. These are strange words that are used in India that are a Sanskrit derivative. And most people know it today as Vedic astrology, V-E-D-I-C. And it's an astounding science because it actually is a science. It doesn't, what I love about it is it doesn't treat you as your astrology. It treats you as a spiritual being having a physical experience who may have actually created the time you came in. And that's what I love. The ancient Kabbalah, the ancient Egyptian stuff, the ancient Vedantic stuff, which is where the Nadi comes from, is amazing stuff. It really is. It looks at, I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This may be the real matrix, because you see how accurate it is. And I have a lot of clients these days who are in psychology, psychiatry, and they're really amazed at its accuracy. And I am too. And when my mother first showed it to me, I was a skeptic. And I actually was a skeptic even in the 80s, but the more I tested it, the more I've used it, the more I've seen its validity. You know, even my father, who doesn't believe in it at all, I told him a few years ago, I said, watch your money. He goes, yeah, you and that astrology crap. And then sure enough, he lost a whole bunch of money. He goes, you know, and every time you tell me that it's accurate, I said, well, it is.
Well, you know, you were talking about the sun signs, and for the people who might not be, familiar with everything, but they are familiar, you know, everybody's seen the thing where it's like, well, I'm a Scorpio, baby. And, you know, what's your sign and things like that. And here's a tip. If you're listening and you use a fake ID, know your sign on the fake ID. That's just a quick tip for you. I learned from a bouncer one time. He's like, I always ask, if I don't know about their age, I always ask them their astrological sign. And the people who it's their real ID will know it right away. And then the people who have no idea what probably their birthday even is on the fake ID, they'll immediately fumble for it. But I'd like to explain real quick for people who may not be completely familiar. So what's the difference between the sun sign stuff that you might see in the newspaper or see online when you're checking into your Yahoo or Google Now or whatever, and then the kind of, you said, you know, Vedic and Jyotish and Kabbalah and different astrolocation astrology that you're more into?
Well, it's huge, and I don't think you can define it really simply, but I would say this way, that first off, in Jyotish or Vedic astrology, you may not even be the same sun sign. Oftentimes people who are Geminis are Tauruses, or, you know, it totally changes. And the reason why is it uses different zodiacs. And it's much more mathematical and complex than sun sign astrology. And again, it's looked at from a whole different viewpoint. And when I really started getting respect for astrology was when I broke into the older stuff. When I say older, I'm saying pre-1600, pre-1700. That's where the rubber really hit the road. There was this huge body of knowledge, a very cohesive body of knowledge that came out of Egypt, the Holy Land, Babylonia, all that. Though a lot of scholars dispute that, but we have actual historical documentation to prove it. There was stuff going on in Alexandria, Egypt, 200-300 BC that was amazing, astounding astrology. I mean, way more advanced than anything I've seen come out in the last 100 years.
So what were they using then? I mean, we're used to that whole, with the sun sign, is like you're born on a certain day, and these are, you know, this is the position of the constellation in the sky. So then what kind of stuff would they use that was different? Like, was it positions of certain stars? Was positions of the Earth?
Oh, well, yeah, it's a lot of stuff. In Vedic astrology, there's 3 different zodiacs. You have a sidereal system, which is where the central sun is, and our solar system's going around. Then you have a lunar zodiac, and you also have the tropical zodiac. All 3 are used. And again, this stuff is way too complex to talk about in a brief radio show, but I can tell you that what I do with clients in readings, and it's amazing, the internet today, I log people right into my computer when I do a reading, and they literally can sit and see what I'm pointing to. And they get it. They understand it. It's a much more sacred science. And again, they looked at it totally different than modern astrology from a spiritual standpoint as well as a technical. From a spiritual standpoint, no one ever said you were your astrology in ancient times. It just didn't go that way. Okay. It was more looking at as an energetic influence. And I personally think if you believe that we have souls and that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, that's really where this stuff shines. And the cycles that you see, modern astrologers use a lot of progressions and transits. Vedic astrology uses some really interesting techniques that are based off the moon. It's believed that the moon, and it's the closest sphere to the earth, is the final place that a soul passes through before being tied into the body. And there's some interesting things in the ancient Talmudic and Babylonian and Kabbalistic documents that, in my opinion, validate why that stuff happens. The Egyptians were very into this stuff too. And long story short, once you start seeing how it works, you begin to understand the sun sign stuff. There's millions of people born every single month.
Right.
With the sun in the same sign. My God, it's not in the same degree. And then you take the ascendant, which is the eastern horizon, which is constantly changing. There's no two charts alike. It's virtually impossible. So to lop someone into a sun sign is like saying all cars that are red are fast and all that are blue are slow. Well, that just isn't true.
So it gets a little more specific to the person. And, you're talking about
a lot more.
So when you're talking about, astrology, you say like, well, I told my father to watch his money, and that was the year the stock market, went poorly or whatever. So is it?
Actually, it wasn't that. He lost an investment.
Oh, okay. And so is it more about predetermination, or is it more about the atmosphere and like that things are predestined to happen, or is it about the, here's the omens point to something? Do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'll tell you what the report card is not ever going to be in on that 100%, but I would say that it's, in my opinion, at this point in my life, I think it's influences. Call it karma is a better word. In the ancient Kabbalah, they called it tikkun. That's what it means in Aramaic, which essentially it's influences. It's influences of energies that are coming at one. And it's kind of like an airline pilot flying. If they don't heed what the radar says, they're probably going to have a real bad day. If they do and adjust their approach accordingly, they're probably going to fly without incident. It's the same way. It's like vectors. If you've ever studied vectors in science, there's forces that act upon us all. Now, the logicians will always say, well, if you keep your things in order, your life in order, your finances, your love life, all that, nothing bad's going to happen. But it does. It happens all the time. And the astrology really accurately shows this through what we call transits, progressions, and various changes. Like location astrology is amazing. I mean, you change your location, you will change your energy. And some of it's amazingly good, and some of it's very challenging. So it's like a radar report. Can you navigate bad stuff? Absolutely. And you'll probably navigate it a lot better than had you not known it was there. It's like the Mack truck approaching the stop sign. He was supposed to stop, but he didn't, and you had a green light. But if you knew it was there, you'd probably hit the brakes. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's kind of like that. It's really not predicting the future. It's looking at energies that are in play and in force. And when, again, you're more informed, you tend to have a much better reaction. And I think that's the golden power right there is reaction.
When you think about, astrology, and it's not just the position of the stars. So like how many, you talked about vectors, and we're talking about the, all of the different things that go into doing a reading. Besides birth date and degree, so your average reading when you were, doing somebody, or you're looking for a business, or you're doing consulting for something, how many factors do you think, come into that? Just to say outside of someone's birth date, if they want to know the complexity of creating an astrological chart for something, how many factors on average do you think you would use for like a personal reading?
Oh, there's quite a few. I actually, over the years, have developed a sheet that I fill in that basically looks at all the Vedic astrology, the cycles, the transits, etc., and progressions. And then I look at astrolocation, transits, cycles, and progressions. And then I look at many other things in terms of cycles. And it's pretty amazing. Even the year you're in, like every 7 years, I'm sure you've heard of the 7-year itch, right?
Right.
Every 7 years, we go through the sun through Saturn. In fact, this matches the days of the week. Sun is Sunday, moon is Monday, Mars is Tuesday, Wednesday's Mercury, of course, Thursday's Jupiter, and they named a restaurant after Friday. Thank God it's Friday. So Friday is Venus,
Right.
and Saturday, in the old days, Mom was changing the sheets and everybody was cleaning on Saturdays. And of course, that's Saturn. Of course, in the older religions, it was the Sabbath, right, or the end of the week, and of course, the new day is Sunday.
Right.
So that also follows the years in your life. It follows in relationships and business. So there's a lot of things I look at when I'm doing things. The other really fascinating type of astrology is something called interrogation, and interrogation is divinational. Now, the religions have made out astrology to be the work of the devil, and yet there's overwhelming evidence. In fact, I have some historically where some of the popes have been busted studying astrology. In fact,
Well, sure.
One died, and they found a whole corpus under his bed, and the pope takes a bath in a bathtub surrounded by the zodiac. So the fact that they're hiding knowledge and not acknowledging it. The Vatican Library is probably one of the most, probably not, if not the most large, voluminous collection of occult knowledge. Is certainly there.
Sure.
Certainly one of them. Yeah.
Well, I think that if the Catholic Church and every pope, if people really knew like all the stuff that went to, I mean, even Dante in the Inferno, he's got like 3 popes in hell. I think it,
Yeah.
and so even they knew that in the Middle Ages.
The astrologer Bonatti, but Bonatti was in Dante's Inferno, and he said he would spend the rest of his eternity with his head twisted backwards. You're right. That's good you know about that. The Bonatti is one of my favorite astrologers. He was in the 11th century, which would be the 1200s. Absolutely astounding stuff. And again, these older documents, and that's actually something more recent, is breathtaking. And I don't know if the food was better or the air was clearer. I'm sure both is the case. But man, to do what they did, the trigonometry, the mathematics, it would rival anything being done today by hand. I mean, it's pretty astounding.
So let me get down to this real quick. Of what I think you're saying about astrology is like, so let's say that you had a database that was full of millions of patterns. Just like the National Weather Service uses a certain amount of, last time the barometer was this, and we had this much weather in the days before, and
Sure.
this much humidity and everything. They put it all together they look at previous patterns to try and predict what the weather is going to be like today. So what you're saying to me about astrology is that, you have thousands of factors. There's so many factors that go into and patterns traced over time. And you would look into saying, here are the, patterns traditionally that have been, looked at for thousands of years in Vedic and Egyptian and the Kabbalah. And
Right.
Here are the conditions coming up. And so by looking at all of these patterns, here's where we're trying to make a prediction about the conditions are going to be like today.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. Just like an airline pilot does. It's exactly the same thing. If you see a particular condition, whether it's clear or challenging, whatever it might be, you're going to fly differently. It's like being in an airline. The pilot knows we're going to hit shear winds coming up, folks. Let's put a lid on the coffee or not serve it until here. And they take it to a different altitude, etc. It's a great analogy. And again, I've had so many clients over the year, particularly people, both personal and business, where we have seen these energies, and the golden question always remains: what would have happened had you not done what you'd done? What if you didn't know? Well, there's no way to go back. Everyone's life is so unique. But one thing's for sure: these conditions are very, very strong, and they experienced it. Now, the fact that they did so with more what I would call conscious awareness probably mitigated it and changed it a lot. I've had so many people too where they've been depressed, like, God, my life's never going to get better. And I'm like, yeah, it will. And it's going to happen right here. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but you have a cycle coming in. I think the coolest thing about astrology is there are major cycles that every single human being will have throughout their life. Sometimes they're repeated, sometimes they're not. And I love when I can give people encouragement saying, hey, there's always something you can do to make it better. And this is where positive thinking kind of meets this whole thing where,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just channeling stuff here. I'm looking at math. And some people don't have their birth time, and that's where interrogation comes in, where I get questions. People will just ask a question: is it my best interest to be in this relationship, or should I pursue this investment? And that's not your birth chart. I just cast a chart for the moment in time persons break their minds. And you can see with amazing accuracy what the probable outcome is going to be. And belief's not required. It's amazing. I use it in my own life all the time.
And we should get a little closer to, what we're talking about today. And while this is not a political show, we are going to be getting into the people who are running for office. It's 2016. It's an election year. That's the main story on the news every single night. And, something, speaking of politics, one thing I was wondering about. So Nancy Reagan died this weekend.
Glad you brought her up. I was just going to bring her up, yes.
And she famously consulted astrologers for her husband. Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, I have a little inside information on that.
Okay.
Ronald was very well protected. He came from Hollywood, and I can tell you, Ronald Reagan used to meet an astrologer named Carol Ryder. Carol Ryder, if you look him up and Google him, he's dead now, was a famous Hollywood astrologer on the inside. He used to meet him at Nate Nell's all the time when he was governor of California. And this got shoved off on Nancy because nobody wanted Reagan to be known as integrating with astrology in any way. And I honor that. In fact, I tell most of my high-profile clients, don't tell anybody you're doing astrology because they'll think you're nuts. So it's a business that has always been kept, close to the vest and hidden, because the religious zealots will always castigate it and say, oh, it's the work of the devil. And yet it's been used forever by generals, kings, emperors, politicians. Now, not all politicians use them, but I have a lot of people in banking, a lot of people in politics who use it, and I can't mention names. Ronald Reagan for sure used it. In fact, he was actually sworn in as governor, not as president, as governor at a very specific time. But you can look it up on the internet. It was like 12:02 midnight or something. And then throughout the White House. And now, when he got shot, just recently, Fox News had said, Nancy used astrology exclusively after he got that assassination attempt.
Right.
That's a bunch of errant crap. Do you know that Robert Mitchum was a ghost writer? The actor Robert Mitchum.
Oh yeah, no, the tough guy.
Carol Ryder. Yeah, he was a ghost writer for the astrologer Carol Ryder. Glenn Ford, Burl Ives, and so many others I can tell you. And they would never let that be known. Never let it be known.
Well, I find that interesting because
who started Southwest Airlines was. I'm telling you, this is something that's kept very secret. Very, private, because it's just, it's like your finances. You just don't go tell everybody.
And it's interesting because what the politician would have said, I needed to consult with my priest on this or whatever, or they talk to a spiritual advisor, like Billy Graham was always a spiritual advisor to somebody in the White House. And Barack Obama has the the reverends he's associated with over his life. Famously. And so the thing is, though, I don't know, is there a huge difference between talking to an astrologer and talking to a spiritual counselor that comes, that's...
Well, you know what? They're one and the same. And that's really what I do. That's why at the beginning of the show, you called me a spiritual, consultant. And that's really what I do. And I use astrology in concert with it and also spiritual things. And I do a lot of things, helping mothers with children and parents in clearing properties, because I do a lot of work. It's called Vastu. It's very similar to Feng Shui, but I think it's more advanced than Feng Shui. In fact, it may be where Feng Shui came from in China. But I do clearings of properties with ghosts or entities and weird things to alter it and make it better. And I can tell you astrology is a part of that. It really... When you go back, speaking of Benatti and Dante and the Inferno, many of these astrologers were very spiritual. They believed in God. They totally believed in many of the scriptures. And, you can actually get your guardian angel from your birth chart.
Oh, that's interesting.
I can do it in, as long as the birth chart is accurate. It's, it's the guardian angel from this dimension or solar system, if you will. And there's a higher one from the order of the thrones, is what it's called. At first, there's God, the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones. So that's the high one. But the one we can get from the birth chart actually is derived in Hebrew or Aramaic from the ascendant degree. Pretty amazing. And I actually make pendants for people with that on there. It's pretty cool stuff. But back to the election thing, yeah, to say that, the politicians don't, not all of them, but I can tell you they do. Speaking of which, this year is a crazy year. It's already been crazy, but it's likely to get a lot crazier. I'll bring up.
So you've seen some things, or, when you were doing the charts for this year, because, like it's already been a media circus like I don't remember in my lifetime.
Yep, exactly. Well, and I think Hillary, the report card's not in on her yet. I really think, and now, I don't know if I have accurate birth data on these people, but if I do, I have. I call her Billary, but
right.
if her birth time is right, somewhere at the end of this month, beginning of April, she's likely to get slammed. I don't think that, we've been hearing on the news that that there actually is a grand jury already in place. It's secretly in place, and that the FBI is going to recommend an indictment. If that happens, she's out of the race. There's no way. And the interesting thing is, if this birth time is right, I have her chart here in front of me, she hits a cycle right at the end of this month, beginning of April, which probably is going to knock her out of the race. And if it doesn't, she's really got some high friends in very high places. As George Carlin said, the owners want her in.
Right.
Because when I look at Hillary's chart, she's really smart. I mean, this one, I can see why she's done what she's done. She's no dull tool, I'll tell you that. She has an amazing ability to communicate. She's extremely adept at how to preface things and respond to things. And she actually has a somewhat pleasant demeanor as well. The Achilles heel in her chart is she has a nasty conjunction in the 10th house, which in plain English means this one, I tell you what, and I don't have anything against any of these candidates or for. I'm just if somebody shoved this chart underneath me, I wouldn't trust this person as far as I could pick her up and throw her. The reason why she is
right. And as far as the show goes, we don't endorse any particular candidates because we think they're all reptilians.
Well, this one actually, if she's not, I don't think she is one, but I think she's definitely beholden to him, because I'll tell you what, she's got a debilitated Mars, which in plain English means nasty, conjunct Saturn in the 10th house. Trust me to tell you, this is a person who would really not have any problems with being dishonest at all, and would actually be a professional at being dishonest. And I think everyone sees that. And what's interesting is this election is such a huge deal, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
There's an ancient astrology that is called the revolutions of the world. And what happened, I went back, this has actually been around for a really, really long time. In fact, there's reports that it was in ancient Babylonia and Egypt, and we actually have documentation to it. In fact, the early astrologers in the 4th and 5th century, right when the Nicene councils and all that were convening in Rome, were busy translating all this ancient knowledge because they were afraid it was going to get lost. Well, one of the things that they had in this was something called the revolutions of the world. It's like, okay, when does society really change? So I've been studying this stuff for years, and it's very complex, but it basically is based on the planet Jupiter and the planet Saturn when they conjoin at 0 degrees from Earth's perspective in a certain condition in the zodiac. And that only happens approximately every 1,000 years. It's not exact, because our years are a little different than the cycles.
Right. Well, the calendar was different back then, right? Before the Gregorian calendar?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And it's hard to get a calendar that's exact, because the solar lunar one is actually the best because of the timing and all that with the cycles and synodic cycles of the moon and the sun. Anyways, long story short, the last big change was in the early 1700s, which ushered in the whole mass manufacturing. Now, of course, Benjamin Franklin is one who's credited, but steam was invented. The whole advanced techniques in the whole industrial revolution was underway, basically from the early 1700s forward. And of course, we had trains by the late 1700s, early 1800s. They were pounding it across the United States and Europe. Long story short, the next cycle is a 240-year interval, which happens exactly in 2020. And this one is really interesting because I remember back.
Does that mean we can look forward to the singularity happening soon enough?
Well, we can, and whoever gets to be president, and I think you don't need any astrology to tell you we're not only is the United States about 19 trillion plus in debt going on 20. What a lot of people don't talk about, and this is one that's really to be watched. Deutsche Bank is kind of the nuclear reactor of the Western banking system.
And I think they featured Deutsche Bank in that movie The Big Short, right? Like I think that's the company that
it's huge. It's huge.
Ryan Gosling works for.
Yeah, I've got clients who are in some pretty high places in banking, and in fact, some of them have worked with Bernanke and Yellen. And what's interesting is, I can't mention names, but
of course,
that we are probably a lot closer to 100 trillion plus in debt when you look at the collective Western banking system. And the mystery is, everyone thinks the Fed prints the money. Well, they actually do print the money. But where is all this money really coming from? Where is this magical bank in the sky that it's all printed from? And it's this collage of the whole Western banking system, which seems to be interacting between London, Deutsche Bank, and here. And the Chinese and the Russians and the whole BRICS nation have certainly been testing alternatives to not only the SWIFT transfer, but also making, the Chinese, dollar become the new de facto standard. And
right.
That is something that's really on the horizon. And I think why this relates so much to the upcoming election is whoever sits in the White House is going to be at the effect of this. And I use that word effect because I don't think presidents run this country. I really don't. They're at the effect. It's like Rockefeller said, you give me control of the money, I don't care who makes the laws.
Well, you made the George Carlin comment before, when he talked about the owners, and that's at the end of that routine, I think, is he says, that's why they call it the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
That's right, yeah. George was a character. I knew George. I actually recorded George once. He was a character.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, George was awesome. He was actually funnier in person than he was, if you can believe it, in front of the crowd.
Oh, that's great.
Absolute genius. But anyways, I think what's going to happen is we are at a turning point in the entire world. Now, anyone would agree with me. You don't need astrology. You don't need cycles. You don't need anything to know that. Every financial expert who knows anything knows we are way past being able to pay this off. And I think Trump appeals to everyone because he's trying to hold the torch saying, I'm going to get in there and make some real changes. And, to quote George, if you ever want to watch George's best work, he in fact, this is a perfect thing to listen to during this election year. Go Google George Carlin language complaints. He was actually invited to Washington, D.C. to give a talk on how politicians twist the language. And one of his lines in there was, after all these politicians make recommendations and do all these different things, now they have to do something. And then he looks into the camera and says, but that would be much too direct. And see, I think when you look at Washington, it's so political and tied down with red tape. Nobody can do anything. Nobody can get anything direct done.
Sure, and that's the appeal of Donald Trump because he, goes in there.
And speaking of Trump's chart, when I looked at Trump's chart, I first saw Donald has Mars in the ascendant. He is a fighter. This guy is definitely a brash, harsh guy. But then I looked a little bit deeper, and he has, in ancient astrology, one of the classic yogas, or what we call classic conditions to be a leader or an emperor, was to have the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th house of career. Well, Trump not only has that, he has it in spades, since we don't want to use Trump's. He has the sun in the 10th, but he's also got the moon's north node, and it's aspected by Jupiter. Plain English, he is very abrasive, but on the other hand, he said some things clearly that he's not going to be able to do. Not that he won't try and do them, but the bureaucratic red tape in Washington is so locked up, I don't think you can just wave your hand and say, go get it done.
Right.
There's so
especially when it's a wall on the
place.
southern border of the United States.
Right.
It'll be a little like, okay, good luck with that.
But I think what appeals to everyone about Trump is what shows up in his chart. He really has leadership ability. And to his defense, not that I'm endorsing him or whatever, the guy's really smart. Now, granted, what he could do in his own company by, hiring and firing someone, he's not going to apply the apprentice techniques in Washington quite as effectively as he did on his TV show.
Right.
But he may actually get in, and they have done everything they can do to stop this guy. They're creating, they're talking now he's a Nazi and this and that and all his followers. I think what's happening is there is a whole, I'll just use it this way, not to sound conspiratorial, but
of course,
there's a whole bunch of people running this place that are not necessarily of Washington. They're influencing it.
Sure.
And everybody knows that. Everybody, it's not that hard to track down. And what's interesting is Trump seems to be the torch that everyone believes will at least throw a dent into it. And actually, you know what? Looking at his chart, he actually might.
Is there anything in his chart that shows some people are saying, that obviously they throw the Hitler thing out right away. Like, oh, it's just, I'm like, well, I think Donald Trump probably has plenty of Jewish friends. But at the same time.
Oh, yeah, he does.
No, is there anything in his chart that says anything about his political beliefs? Like everybody's like, well, he's just telling people anything that they want to hear, and he's using people's
what abilities? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, is he using? Is there anything in his chart about him just, the malleability of his beliefs? Is there anything in there about what he believes actually? Is it conservative? Is it liberal? A lot of people are saying that he's just saying what people want to hear.
Well, they're all going to do that.
Of course.
You really see human nature during an election year. Everybody's rolling their eyes. I'd have to say this is a guy that's a lot more honest than Hillary. I would definitely say that. And I tell you, in terms of adaptability, this is a guy that is likely to learn fast, really learn fast. And he's not a politician. And being a businessman versus being in the bureaucratic red tape, it's almost like having a Gordian knot behind you with your hands tied behind your back in Washington because of the policies, the years upon years upon years of everybody being bought and paid for. I love George Carlin's line when he says, how much soft money can I take from my core values? Because that's pretty much what politicians do. And, it's well known. And that's one of the things Trump has run on is the fact that he's not being bought by anyone. And I think that's exactly what's scaring everyone and why he's getting the smear he is. I would just say his astrology shows this is actually a pretty favorable guy. He hits a cycle this October and another one this summer. I don't know if they're going to be able to stop him. I think they're going to really keep trying and they're going to smear. But I think this guy just may make it work. And if Hillary gets indicted, which all indications here seem to show that she will. If my birth time is off a little bit in her chart, I would say it'll just delay it one way or another. But I think she's likely to get her wings clipped here. And if that's the case, Trump against Bernie, I think it's over.
Speaking of Bernie Sanders, now in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am, I mean, they practically call him Saint Bernie. I guess I wouldn't call him Saint Bernie.
I got to tell you, I like Bernie's chart. I really do. And when I looked at his chart, he's actually, I think, a well-meaning guy. I think his policies, and he's also very, very smart. Mm-hmm. His policies are a little bit out there. I just don't think, who knows? I just don't see him winning. He's not in the... his chart doesn't show it. There's nothing in here that would show that he's likely to be the president of the United States.
There's no favorable signs, like all of a sudden his chart, the stars get aligned at the beginning of November or anything like that. There's nothing.
Cycles. It's cycles. And speaking of which, let me go back to this because I actually have the inauguration day. It's interesting. Obama's first inauguration, he was sworn in on a void of course moon. And that is a really strange time. It's like nothing will happen and of consequence, and nothing has. I mean, the only thing that has happened is we've tripled our debt.
Well, that's an interesting thing. So the idea that his inauguration day, there was no signs of that something momentous was going to happen from that inauguration.
None. And I thought it was great that we had a black president. We could get past racism. All that's great. And Obama's a really smart guy, but he has done nothing to unify the country. In fact, I think he's divided it. There's been more division subvertly. And I could tell you some stories about Obama. I've actually got a couple of clients. One of them went to Harvard with him, and another one I know met him at Occidental. So some interesting stories about that guy. He's a very unusual guy. I'll just say that. And I think he knew he was going to be president back in the 80s. Now that's a very interesting thing to be saying to someone when it's 20 something years before it happens.
Right. Well, I mean, and it worked. He was 2 terms, and so obviously the
owners put him in. That last election, I think Romney was told to throw it, just like a prize fighter. You're going to throw this fight, and I think and Trump nailed him on that. He actually said he just walked off the set at basically the last month of the election, and he did. I think he was told to throw it. And when you have the Diebold voting machines, which, by the way, George Soros' company owns, I don't believe you can get a completely honest election in this country. And it's nothing new. If you look back over the last couple hundred years, there's been some real questionable practices employed with elections. And
the idea
easier now than ever before.
And also the idea that you look at major policies and legislation and everything that's gone through over the past few decades. There was a great survey done. I think they did it at Princeton of the way polls of American people's opinions versus the policies that went through. And
right.
they never matched up, but it always matched up to being favorable for some kind of business or something.
I mean, to get, like George said, the game is rigged, folks.
Right.
It really is. The tables are tilted. I mean, the American dream was pretty much spot on, and I think that hit such a chord with so many people. Knowing George personally, I can tell you, George had his writing studio right across from his house. In fact, George lived kitty corner from O.J. Simpson. I remember when all that stuff happened with O.J., I was over there, and George's house,
with another Wisconsin great, Cato Kalin, another Wisconsinite.
Yeah, well, George and Brenda, his first wife, they just packed up and left. They said it was so crazy. But George, when he wrote The American Dream, meeting him, I really think he did believe in God. A lot of people don't think he did because he busts on religion.
Yes, he did.
But I really do, and I just think he was disgusted with the rhetorical crap that goes on, and I think no place do you see it more than in politics. I can't imagine why a guy like Donald Trump, who has billions, would even want to be president. I mean, it's like taking a Q-tip and throwing it in the mud puddle. It's like, wow.
Well, speaking of his Republican opponents, like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio.
Yeah, Ted Cruz, I got his chart, and that guy, I mean, that's an interesting study here. This guy, I just don't see him making it, even though he's doing fairly well. he is in a debilitated Saturn period. And there's another guy, and I'm not in any way favoring these candidates. I'm just reading the charts. Sure. I wouldn't trust him farther than I could pick him up and heave him either. I think Trump scares the hell out of Washington and the people who really do run this place, because I don't think they're going to be able to control them. And I tell you what, they'll shoot them. Now, the last two guys that tried to print money, which was Lincoln and Kennedy, both got shot, and they both tried to print U.S. Treasury bonds. In fact, there's historical evidence to it. Oh. And Trump ain't bulletproof. And I can tell you, he better not switch airline pilots. He's smart enough to probably adapt. Anybody who gets into this system, Washington is nothing more than an Egyptian temple. If you look at, there was a French architect that designed it. In fact, Washington, D.C. is not even technically in the United States. It's called the District of Columbia.
Right. They have their own special thing. Yeah. And that's interesting, too, because when you look at the Washington Monument as an obelisk, and everything.
That's right.
When you go to Paris, you see that the obelisks that they took from Egypt, it's
an Egyptian temple, without question. Anybody who wanted it, they should go read the book Talisman, which is all about the American roots and the French architect that created it. It's steeped in masonry. It's steeped in all kinds of occult stuff. They knew it was going to be the power center of the world. When you get into the Knights Templar and you get into secret society, there's some interesting stuff that goes right back to King Solomon, Egypt, all of this ancient stuff.
Well, would you say that, for people, you were just saying like they knew that Washington, D.C. would be the power center of the world. Would you say that people should maybe, like, if they think about they're having a kid, is there better places for you that you could go to birth your child that might increase the success of the birth, or things like that?
Well, it's more time. Yeah, you could do that, but that wouldn't work as well. What really matters is you can do that. But yes, absolutely, you can pick a time. I actually do a lot of conception elections for women. And my child, we actually had our child. We conceived him with astrology, and more importantly, we actually had him at a certain day and time because she had to go C-section. She had to induce.
Sure.
So a lot of people want their child naturally, and I totally respect that. But when you have an opportunity, it's the timing. It's absolutely amazing how accurate it is. And again.
So did you guys like set it up so your kid wouldn't be disobedient or something like that? Where you're like, okay, 5 o'clock. Well, that means he's gonna be really good in kindergarten.
Well, it's not that you don't have that much power. You're more at the effect of something. See, electional astrology is a whole other world. We use that for filing corporations and marriages and all that. So what you have to do is find, it's like a stop and go light. You find when energies are present that are favorable. And you can't control when a woman's pregnant, that she has to have the child. If she has to induce or you're going C-section, yes, you can slide it as much as a week or so one way or another. But in general, if you're working with the doctors, which someone should be when they're pregnant, it's important to kind of realize you're going to get what's there. But there's always lunar aspects and ascending aspects that you can get that are really favorable. And, that's it. Like I had a window with my boy, Camille said, my wife said, I have to induce. And she says, when would be a window within this amount of days? The doctor says, I have to have it. And I said, this is perfect. So I pick the best day out of that window. I do this all the time for surgery elections, where people will go in for elective surgeries, whatever it might be. And I'll say, don't tell the doctor you're using astrology, though some doctors like it. Most don't.
Right.
And what I do is I just say, get the, Wednesdays, he's not going to be on the golf course, and we'll pick the best one. And then they'll go, on that one. So, you kind of are at the effect of what's up there. I don't have a spaceship to go up there and move stuff around. I wish I did. But.
Right, of course. But looking at the candidates, take Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. Now, they're all in the upper 60s, and Bernie's the oldest at, I think he's 72.
No, he's 74 and a half. He's actually 74 years old, 6 months right now.
Okay.
He's born in 1941.
1941, all right. So you have upper 60s and 70s for
Yeah, Trump is 69. He's going to be 70 this June.
And Hillary, I believe, is she's in her late 60s.
Hillary is she's 68, 4 months and 13 days. So this October she'll be 69.
Now, is there the kind of difference between the older candidates versus a younger guy like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, who's also much younger? Or even Barack
Ted
Obama.
Cruz is 45.
Right, and
Ted Cruz was born at 70. Yeah.
And when you think about that, are there any particular years or time frames that seem to be more auspicious for leadership and where the country's going than other? Would it be preferable if we have one of the older candidates versus the younger candidates, eventually make it to the end? Does the chart say anything like that?
Well, I don't get, again, Hillary and Ted Cruz out of the whole lot, those are the two that have much more questionable charts. I've heard rumors that Hillary is not real healthy, and I would probably buy that based on her chart. She's in what we call a debilitated sun period, which in plain English means up until 2021, she's not in real good shape. So, she looks fairly healthy, but there's been rumors that she's had, fainting issues. She could have some real health issues too coming up from basically this spring forward, the end of this month in. She hits a period that's not good for her up until 2017. So when I look at her and then I look at Cruz, those are the two that show up probably the most. I would say Trump looks pretty good, and so far as I can tell, Bernie Sanders looks pretty darn good too.
How about Marco Rubio?
Marco Rubio, I haven't spent a lot of time on him only because I don't think he's going to get in. I think he's pretty much at the last gasp. Rubio looks like health-wise he's fine. Rubio is very emotional. I don't, when I look at these candidates and I just look at the astrology, and again, I'm not favoring anyone. If I had to say who had the most bulletproof leadership abilities, I would have to actually say it's Trump, just looking at the chart. And again, I'm not endorsing or favoring him. I'm just looking at the astrology.
Right.
He has the most powerful chart, bar none. Now, great, he's a little bombastic. He's certainly arrogant and pushy, and he pisses off a lot of people. But when I look at the chart, he's got the classic leadership chart, and he hits a cycle. In fact, Trump hits a cycle that's never happened before in his life. He has what we call primary directed sun conjuncting the ascendant, or the ascendant conjuncting the sun. One of the oldest types of astrology, which matriculated up out of Egypt, is something called primary directions. Basically, the first 6 hours after the soul is tied into the body, you will hit every aspect you'll hit in the next 90 years, in the first 6 hours after birth.
Okay.
And these are very ancient type of astrology. It's literally directing what we call the eastern horizon by 1 degree of ascension equals a year. And when I look at Trump, these things are complex matter because I don't know that I have an exact birth time on Trump. That's the problem. See, I don't know that any of the data is 100% trustable on this, but if it's close, Trump clearly has the ascendant by primary direction conjuncting his sun in the 10th house. Plain English, that's the kind of stuff that usually makes it happen. And
that's interesting. So
I don't get that with Hillary.
So you think that the charts right now, as far as they favor, so Hillary, you think go through a bad period. Donald Trump's on a good period, and Bernie Sanders, the charts show that he's probably a stand-up guy, but they don't. Do they show like?
Yeah, it does. I actually like his chart. I think this is the kind of guy I'd go have coffee with. He's a nice guy. He really is. And interestingly enough, both Sanders and Trump have the same kind of energy. They both have the sun in the 10th house with the north node, which means they both truly have leadership capabilities. They really do. I mean, that's another classic leadership chart here. And, a guy at almost 75 years old who's out there pounding the campaign trail like he's doing, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's got to be a high energy guy.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. He's almost 70. He's going to be 75 this September. September 8th is his birthday. So, I could tell you, man, I mean, that's a lot of stress. And all these candidates, when they start getting in their late 60s, early 70s, that's a lot of work to be on the road constantly like that. And I would tell you that Trump, as far as I can tell, the birth date is all correct. And another thing I've been casting is something called interrogations. He seems to be the one that's going to prevail. That's the best I can get right now. He seems to be the one that's going to kind of lop across the finish line. I really think the owners want Hillary in. I really do. I think she will carry on the agenda that's been in place. Not to sound conspiratorial, but there is an agenda in place. And I think Trump will be sat down if he does get in, and they'll play him a little video called the JFK haircut and say, this is what happens to folks who don't listen to this.
Well, what exactly is an interrogation? First of all, it's a good joke. I'm going to use that sometime. But interrogations, like what exactly is that? Is that when you're kind of looking to the charts with a question in mind?
It's exactly what it is. In fact, that's precisely what it is. What happens, the reason we have sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight is because of the rotational nature of the Earth, right? So that's the sun isn't rising and culminating and setting, and it's not doing that. We're rolling around the axis. So the point is that's moving quite fast. In fact, we're doing about 1,600 miles, just a little under Mach 2 on the axis. And that's validated in a lot of places. So it does vary slightly depending on latitude, north and south. But here's the point, is that when you cast a chart based on, you can't use astrology to figure out when to cast a chart. You use consciousness to figure out when to cast a chart. So you cast a chart based on a need-to-know basis. The Eastern horizon and its ruler represents the querent, or the person posing the question. Whatever you're asking about represents the house. There's 12 houses, and you'd have to understand astrology. And see, this is where ancient astrology is superior, because they have many complex divisions. Now, the astronomers laugh at astrology because they say the constellations don't line up. And you know what? They're right. They don't. They never did. And the interesting thing is, it's a spiritual matrix. And that's provable, and I'm always laughing at these shows on the Bible. They never talk about the permutations. You can't do this in Latin, you can't do it in English, but if you go back to Aramaic and Hebrew, there are specific permutations, particularly in Exodus and the Psalms and other places, that line up precisely with the angels that are named in the zodiac. But this stuff has been long neutered and thrown in the dungeon underneath the Vatican and other places, because they don't want anybody knowing that. And I can tell you it's a spiritual matrix. And why I'm bringing this up is because the ancient astrology allows very specific ways to read an interrogation chart to derive at what the answer is. And it's using geometry, and it's using a much more ancient zodiac than anything today.
Okay.
Less Linda Goodman's heart and the sun signs, but it doesn't work.
Well, Jeff, I got to say that this has been a fascinating interview. I've really enjoyed talking and learning all about this stuff, because I'm not I know very little about astrology, so it's really fun to get into the various kinds. And
it's complex stuff. Just to say another note on this, I've got a lot of friends who are hard scientists. One in particular is Dr. Claude Swanson. And back to what you were bringing up earlier, there is scientific data and databases that have been run, like the Gauquelin calculations, which essentially profile different database placements or average placements in a birth chart. Is this person an athlete? Is this person a businessman? Is this person a psychiatrist? Is this person a murderer? Is this person, whatever it is? And it showed up amazingly accurate. In fact, most of the historical documents that we have in astrology today came from skeptics. There was a man back in the 8th century whose name was Abu Mashar. He scoffed at astrology. This is a bunch of crap. And it was either him or Mashal, I can't remember which one. And he was in what we call the House of Wisdom, which was the Arabian sultans had said, if we don't translate this information from ancient Egypt and Babylonia, we're going to lose it. They called them holy wars. I don't know what's holy about any war, but the wars, or so-called holy wars, were decimating the ancient culture and knowledge. So they had translated a lot of this stuff. And long story short, it's amazing how detailed and accurate it is when you use these techniques. It's not something someone can learn overnight. It takes years to learn it, but it's amazing stuff. And yes, we have free will, but we also, just like the weather, we're influenced by it. And I think when you use a common sense approach where you say, okay, I'm going to look at the influences upon me, and then I'm going to do something about it, because our free will and God is above astrology. In fact, Gandhi said something I really love. Gandhi said when God created the law of karma, he could sit back and let the souls play. And I really think that fits the ancient astrology. You're seeing energies that we may have actually created that unfold. Like the reason we have the parents we have, and the brothers and the sisters and the bosses and all the spouses. Sometimes it's very challenging, and maybe it's just it's playing out.
Well, that's an interesting thought. And I'm also think that you brought up some interesting perspectives. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens to Hillary in April. So that will be exciting. Is it going to be the emails? Is it going to be a bombshell? And that's
I mean, it's leaning that way. It really is. The only way I'm going to be off in timing, and that's fitting pretty accurately with what we're hearing in terms of the investigation and everything else. And she's, of course, downplaying it. Of course, she's an attorney, right?
Of course.
She knows how to downplay it. I would say, even if the birth time's off, it looks like it's right around the corner.
Okay, so that'll be interesting. And so all my Bernie Sanders supporting friends in Madison. So look forward to that.
Yeah. I like Bernie. I think personally he's a good guy. I don't know about his policies, but I think he's a good guy.
Sure.
You know, and Donald Trump, they say he doesn't really have any, but he may learn them. You know, I think Trump is just a guy who's going to get in there and try and do his best. But I think anybody who gets in there is going to find that's like immersing yourself into the chamber of horrors when it comes to undoing half the stuff that's there.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting too. So, you know,
like
people
punching Jello, you know,
people were like that Donald Trump could never happen, but all, you know, the signs are auspicious for the Donald this year. So we're going to see what happens.
It really does. And I'm just being objective here.
So we'll see what happens. But either way, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, Jeff. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, they want to see what you're all about, maybe get on your newsletter or ask you some more questions about astrology, where can they do that?
It's Jeff@jeffharman.com.
So
and that's A-N, not O-N. It's HARMAN.com.
And we're going to have that in the show notes too.
JeffHarman.com.
We're going to have a link directly at othersidepodcast.com/84 is where you're going to be able to get that information from Jeff, and you can find it and you can check out his website and stuff like that. So thanks very much, Jeff. Very informative today.
Oh, you bet. And best of luck on your music.
You know, no matter what the stars say, don't take that anything as a particular endorsement for any political candidate.
Right, of course.
So Jeff was an interesting character and learned some new things about astrology today.
Right.
So the song, since we are in election year, and our song Dangerous Times does talk about the stars colliding and living in dangerous times, we thought this would be an appropriate one for our election year astrology special, Dangerous Times.
Yeah. These are the dangerous times.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
It sounded to me like naughty astrology.